Welcome, Gunrunner.
Back in June of this year, I did a documentary on the unreleased SNK Hyper Neo Geo 64 console, a system that was supposed to be identical to the company's arcade hardware, just as the Neo Geo AES was before it. In the video I also mentioned, albeit briefly, that this wasn't the only console that was left unreleased by SNK. There were in fact several more. Now it's time to go back to that story in this video, as I'll be looking at the SNK Neo Star, the two different forms it took and why it ended up on the scrap heap. I've covered a lot of the Neo Geo's history in the last video, but I do think it's worth going over it again, because it does play a very important part in this story too. When the original Neo Geo AES arrived in 1990, the 16-bit revolution had only just got started. The Sega Mega Drive was starting to make inroads into the market, and the Super Nintendo was just around the corner. Both of these systems were promising arcade quality gaming, but the SNK machine was the only one that actually delivered it. What made the Neo Geo AES different to its rivals is that the console used the exact same hardware as SNK's existing Neo Geo multi-video system. A clever piece of arcade hardware that offered owners the ability to put up to 6 different games into a single cabinet. This unique feature was also a key economic consideration for operators with limited floor space, and saved them a great deal of money in the long run, as buying new games was far cheaper than purchasing a new arcade cabinet. With its games stored on self-contained ROM cartridges, you could easily change your selection of titles on the MVS and simply add new cards into the displays to signify the changes. It was an enormous revolution for the coin-op industry and proved incredibly popular with arcade operators across the world. The Neo Geo itself was promoted as a 24-bit system, but in reality it was actually a 16-bit machine, and at its heart was a multi-roller 68000 CPU, the same processor found in systems such as the Sega Mega Drive, Commodore Amiga and Atari ST. But SNK was smart and knew that by calling it 24-bit they already had a perceived advantage over their 16-bit competition. They weren't completely lying either, as the system did feature a 24-bit data bus and had an 8-bit Z80 coprocessor. I don't think I need to tell you that 8 plus 16 is also 24, but I just did anyway. Looking at the Neo Geo's technical specs, there's no doubting just how powerful it was for the time. But all this performance did come at a pretty big cost. In fact, the North American launch price was an eye-watering $649.99. That equates to over $1,200 in today's money. The games followed along the same huge scale, being priced at $200 upwards, depending on the ROM size. Despite these astoundingly high prices, people still bought them, and over the whole of the Neo Geo's long lifetime, SNK managed to sell close to 1 million units of their home-based systems. When you factor in the more than healthy sales of the arcade hardware too, it proved to be a very profitable venture for the Japanese company. With this in mind, it's pretty obvious that SNK would be looking to maintain this success by launching new models of the machine, not to mention making sure they were not left behind by the latest technology.
いいですが、玲子ですか？
もしもし。
9月9日、ネオジオ CD 新登場。
SNK
ゲームをしよう。
9月9日、ネオジオ CD 新登場。
SNK
So in 1992, it was announced that they had started work on a new system. This news first appeared in the official SNK newsletter, but was soon reported by other magazines too. It was initially referred to as the Neo Geo 2 before being called the Neo Geo CD, and although details were scarce, it did mention that the system was penned in for a late 1993 release, would be CD based, and that SNK would be unveiling it in Japan first, as you'd probably expect. Then things went quite quiet on the project before it popped up again in late 1993, around the same time SNK originally promised it would be released. The NeoStar name was now being used by the press, as well as still referring to it as the Neo Geo CD. There was also a mock-up sketch of what the system would look like, as well as some concrete facts about its architecture. The first thing to mention about this new console is that it would be able to use both CDs and cartridges with a similar memory card slot to the original Neo Geo, although it was boasted that this would now have 20 times as much storage capacity. The many hardware innovations also included infrared joysticks, a so-called Super SCART video output, stereo audio outputs, and an expansion port for connection to a modem and other peripherals. The latter is of particular importance because the article in the Neo Geo newsletter also stated that there was going to be a cartridge that allowed the Neo Star to be used as a home banking system, with the modem being used to download information that could be then saved onto a memory card. Other much mooted uses for the expansion port and modem including home shopping, multimedia applications, and even a VR headset, which was very much a big thing at the time with the emergence of Virtuality's VR arcade games, and both Sega and Atari announcing their own VR systems. In terms of its technical abilities, the Neo Star was designed around a 32-bit RISC-based CPU running at 14.5 MHz, which doesn't sound like a lot, but SNK were promising it would be 5 times faster than the original model. Sadly, it doesn't state exactly what chip they were using, so we can't dig into these claims any deeper. It was said to have a maximum resolution of 640x480 and would feature a custom graphics chip that was capable of producing polygons. Rather strangely, no details were revealed about the amount of colours on offer, sprites on screen, or any other custom hardware abilities. Sega also promised it would come with surround sound, but didn't go into any more detail on the audio capabilities either. Now let's go back to the controllers for a moment, as there's also some interesting stuff to talk about here. As well as being wireless, SNK also reported that they would feature headphone jacks, special palm grips to hold them in place, and be much lighter than the original models. Perhaps the most interesting part of this announcement isn't about the Neo Star console itself though, rather what they had planned for the original Neo Geo. It was stated that SNK planned to release a CD add-on for the original system that would effectively upgrade it into a Neo Star, so existing owners wouldn't have to buy a new console. Strangely, there is no mention of backwards compatibility, which you would imagine would also be a feature of the Neo Star if such an add-on was possible on the existing Neo Geo.
ゲームをしよう
キングも侍も玲子に負けた。このままでは
ソフト続々ネオジオ CD。
こうしてこっち早く。そう
係長上手。闇に滅せよ。
おやじ
玲子。
野郎もキングも侍もソフト続々ネオジオ CD。
SNK.
All of this sounds pretty exciting, and it certainly seems that it would have kept the Neo Star in line with other new consoles of the time, such as the 3DO, CD32 and Jaguar, and possibly even the upcoming Saturn and PlayStation 2. The writing on the wall for the Neo Star began when SNK announced the upgrade add-on was cancelled, as it would just be too costly to produce, and instead they were planning to release a new version of existing hardware featuring a CD drive instead of cartridge, meaning much cheaper games. This of course arrived in late 1994 as the Neo Geo CD. The release of the Neo Geo CD got a lot of people speculating that the Neo Star project was dead, but for a while at least SNK were very insistent it was still being developed, but claimed the hardware was now being upgraded to compete better with the new machines from Sega and Sony. Of course this turned out to be untrue, as with the worldwide release of the Sony PlayStation, the Neo Star was quietly cancelled. Although no official reasons have ever been stated for the system's demise, it's speculated that SNK believed they didn't have the financial means to compete with Sega, Sony and Nintendo in the cutthroat console market, and the huge success of the PlayStation, while other consoles like the aforementioned Jaguar and 3DO were failing, only compounded that further. Instead, SNK decided to refocus their goals and stick to what they were good at, making arcade hardware. So the Neo Star then evolved further to become the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and the circle of life started once again. As interesting as I think the Neo Star console is, I just can't see any way that it could have competed in the console market of the mid-90s. Retail shelves hadn't been so crowded with new consoles since the early 80s, with the Atari Jaguar, Sega 32X, 3DO, Philips CDI, Commodore Amiga CD32, Sega Saturn, Sony PlayStation and, a bit later, the Nintendo 64, all vying for our attention. I just don't think SNK would have had the financial muscle, let alone the developer support, to make an impact. So in my mind, cancelling the Neo Star to prolong the existing Neo Geo hardware was probably the right move. But I want to know what you think. Is the Neo Star a system that would have got you excited back in 1995? Please let me know in the comments. But before I go, I must also thank all my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. So special thanks to Thunder Fundington, John DiLiberto, Keith, Carl Olsen, Larry Anderson, Mark Slorence, Mr. Gaboto, Psycho Larvos, Coldar Fusion, and Scott Maguire. If you want to do the same thing, then go check out my Patreon right now and get access to a host of extra content including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, and I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.